Imagine holding humanity's first paintbrush. It wasn't a brush, it was your own finger dipped in blood and ochre. If you messed up the line, you wasted pigment that took days to collect. If you got it right, you created something eternal. That was the creative pressure 65,000 years ago. Today you'll discover how that first artistic gesture became the foundation of every modern visual industry, and why the Mona Lisa has more in common with a prehistoric cave than you ever imagined. The walls of the Chauvet Cave, hidden in the mountains of France, hold a secret that neither Leonardo da Vinci nor the modern factories of Faber-Castell ever imagined they would share. Separated by tens of thousands of years, they all rely on the same ancestral urgency to transform raw matter into a symbol, a thought into an image, a dream into tangible reality. When you squeeze a tube of acrylic paint today, perhaps to paint on a canvas, perhaps just to make a colorful note, you are repeating the same ritualistic gesture that a human made when crushing iron oxide against a smooth stone 40,000 years ago. The difference is not in the creative intention, not in the impulse to leave a permanent mark on the world. The difference is only in the packaging. But why did our ancestors feel this irresistible need to paint? Why did they risk their lives in dangerous caves just to leave their marks on the walls? The answer is buried deep within the earth, and also coded in your own brain. Answer with an emoji. What was the first drawing you ever made? The first alchemists of pigment, 70,000, 40,000 years ago. Christopher Henshelwood was digging in what seemed like just unimportant ancient sand in Blombos on the southern coast of South Africa. It was 2008, another day of frustrating archaeological excavation under the scorching African sun. His hands were dirty with earth, his knees sore from hours of crouching, digging layer by layer with the patience of someone who knows that the history of humanity might be hidden in the next handful of soil. Then he found something that would change our understanding of humanity forever. Small shells of Haliotis maidae, marine snails the size of a coin, carefully filled with a complex mixture, red ochre mixed with burnt bone marrow and charcoal fragments. Mass spectrometry left no doubt, 73,000 years ago. These weren't just the remains of a primitive meal. It was humanity's first color palette, organized and prepared with the same intention that a modern artist arranges their tubes of paint. A pause for thought. Imagine holding that shell in your hands. It was literally a seashell functioning exactly like a tube of Faber-Castell today, storing pigment, ready for immediate use. These first artists, scattered across sub-Saharan Africa, were true experimental chemists. Through trial and error that lasted for generations, they discovered that antelope bones burned precisely at 400 degrees C produced a deep, lasting black. That specific clays, rich in iron oxide and collected only at certain times of the year, generated vibrant yellows that resisted the passage of time. That certain sedimentary rocks, when ground with basalt stones, released reds that looked like fresh blood even after weeks. Modern X-ray fluorescence analyses revealed something even more impressive. They already had a mastery of complex mixtures involving up to 5 different ingredients in a single paint. It wasn't just crushing and mixing, it was about understanding proportions, drying times, and the chemical compatibility between materials. If the mixture didn't stick to the wall or faded quickly, you didn't get a second chance. The materials were too scarce, the collection time too long, the risk of leaving the safety of the group too great. Quick question. Did you ever mix colors as a child? Tell me what color it made. And imagine doing that knowing it was your only chance. The symbol revolution, 40,000, 20,000 years ago. But something absolutely extraordinary happened when these chemical experiments left the small tribal laboratories and found the cave walls. In the depths of Lascaux, 25 meters underground, where the temperature remains a constant 13 degrees C all year, and the humidity preserves pigments like a natural cold room, we find humanity's first art galleries. But these were not random drawings by bored people. They were highly sophisticated visual maps that documented life in motion with a precision that rivaled modern photography. The technique was impressively advanced and demonstrated a profound knowledge of optical illusion. The Lascaux artists consciously used the natural irregularities of the rocky walls to create three-dimensional effects that would anticipate Renaissance techniques. A small protrusion in the limestone rock magically became the muscular back of a bison in motion, A natural depression transformed into the rounded belly of a pregnant mare. A crack in the wall became the distinctive mark of a wounded mammoth. And to represent movement, something that challenged artists until the invention of photography, they developed an ingenious technique. They painted multiple legs on the animals, creating the first animation in human history. A horse with 8 legs was not an error or a fantasy, it was pure visual science. When the irregular light of the fire flickered on the cave wall, the animal literally seemed to gallop before the eyes of the observer. They were manipulating perspective, depth, and movement 35,000 years before Leonardo da Vinci theorized about these techniques in his treatises. The most incredible part: modern gas chromatography studies revealed that these Paleolithic artists already intuitively understood the fundamental principles of color permanence, concepts that today drive billions of dollars in the chemical paint industry. They mixed their mineral pigments with natural pine resins and mammoth fat, creating a durability formula that has remained intact for millennia, resisting humidity, temperature variations, and even earthquakes. If you've ever painted something in your life, even a simple house wall, you have consciously participated in this ancient history. Quick check. Can you imagine painting without electric light? Only with fire? How would you keep from smudging the drawing in the dark? The birth of the personal brand, 20,000 ons, 10,000 years ago. Now comes the part that literally gives me goosebumps and changes everything we thought about human identity. 25,000 years ago, in the frozen depths of the Pecmerle Caves in France, something revolutionary was happening. Dean Snow from Penn State University, an anthropologist who spent decades studying anatomical proportions, made a discovery that rewrote our understanding of humanity's first artists. Meticulously analyzing hundreds of fossilized handprints on the walls, those mysterious silhouettes created by placing a hand on the wall and blowing pigment around it like a natural stencil, he applied forensic anthropology techniques to measure the proportion between fingers, especially the ratio between the index and ring fingers, a reliable sexual marker that remains constant throughout millennia. The result was revolutionary. 75% of the prints were from women, identified by the characteristic proportion between the female fingers. The first artists of humanity were primarily women, a moment of profound impact. Imagine a young Paleolithic mother, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, carefully teaching her 8-year-old daughter how to prepare pigments while the rest of the clan slept around the fire, passing on technical knowledge that would last not for decades, but literally for millennia, teaching not just how to mix colors, but how to leave a mark that would transcend death. Each family group, each tribe, developed its own specific and unmistakable visual signature. Certain combinations of colors, red ochre mixed with black charcoal, or pure yellow from ferrous clay, geometric dot patterns that functioned as tribal codes, characteristic styles for outlining hands. It was humanity's first conscious manifestation of a personal brand, the first individual and collective logo of our species. This handprint served multiple complex social functions. It identified who had passed through there, when, with which group, established territory and communicated information to future generations. It was simultaneously art, communication, mapping, and a declaration of existence. The Apple or Nike logo, which you see today on products around the world, serves exactly the same social and psychological function as these ancient handprints. To say, this was made by us, this represents us, this will remain when we are no longer here. From the controlled spray of pigment on the damp walls of Pecmerle to the aerosol spray on modern urban facades, the technology has evolved radically, but the fundamental human need to leave a mark remains absolutely the same. Tell me one thing. If you were going to leave a mark to last 10,000 years, what color would you choose? And where would you make it? From the cave to the Renaissance, the secret heritage Florence, autumn of 1503. Leonardo da Vinci's studio, located on the second floor of a modest house on Via Ghibellina, was bathed in the golden light of the Tuscan sunset. On a dark wooden table, among scrolls filled with his mirrored notes and detailed anatomical studies, Leonardo held with an almost religious reverence a small Venetian glass flask. Inside it, a blue powder more valuable than pure gold, authentic lapis lazuli, extracted from the remote mountains of Afghanistan and transported across dangerous silk routes by caravans that risked their lives to bring this preciousness to Europe. Every grain of this pigment had been patiently ground from the same rock formations where primitive artists collected pigments millennia ago using almost identical techniques. Hard stones against harder stones, infinite patience, knowledge passed down from generation to generation. Leonardo couldn't have known. Archaeology hadn't been born yet, but he was holding in his hands the direct evolution of a technique discovered 40,000 years ago in the caves of Europe. The same fundamental principle applied by the Lascaux artists, mixing precious mineral pigments with natural binders, in his case refined linseed oil and the yolk of eggs from ducks fed a specific diet, to create a substance that would transcend time. As he carefully prepared the mixture that would give life to the enigmatic eyes of the Mona Lisa, those eyes that seemed to follow the observer not by magic, but by a refined technique of layering translucent glazes, Leonardo was unconsciously replicating the same mental process as the Paleolithic chemists: experimentation, observation, refinement, the search for permanence. The connection was perfect and ironic. From the small seashell palettes in Blombos to the studios of the High Renaissance, an uninterrupted and unbreakable chain of knowledge on how to transform mineral matter into human expression. Leonardo's codices, written in his characteristic mirrored script, reveal an almost Paleolithic obsession with the chemistry of colors, how to mix without the colors corrupting, in what proportions to achieve durability, how to create transparencies that imitate natural light. His questions were a direct echo of the same questions that tormented the cave artists: how to make the color last, how to make the mixture stick, how to create convincing visual effects. Can you feel this moment? Da Vinci, the greatest genius of the Renaissance, painting the most famous work in history using fundamentally Paleolithic techniques refined by millennia of human experimentation. Comment below. Did you ever notice the intense blues in old paintings? Now you know why they were so special and so expensive. The industrial explosion, from precious drops to rivers of color, Victorian London. A silent revolution, one that would have gone unnoticed by most people at the time, was about to explode into art history and forever democratize access to visual creation. To be brutally honest, John Gough Rand was a mediocre artist. His landscapes never achieved recognition. His portraits were technically correct but lacked soul. However, he was an absolutely brilliant inventor, driven by a visceral frustration that every artist knows: watching precious paint dry and harden before they could even use it. Imagine the anguish. You spend hours carefully preparing a perfect mixture of pigments, perhaps genuine ultramarine that cost the equivalent of a month's salary, and when you go to apply it to the canvas, the paint has already hardened on the palette. All the work lost, all the investment wasted. Rand was tired of this daily torture. Inspired by the preservation techniques he had observed in pharmaceutical products, he developed something that our Paleolithic ancestors would have dreamed of inventing: the sealed metal paint tube with a screw cap. What once took days of laborious preparation, grinding pigments and delicate mixing, now fit literally in anyone's pocket and cost just a few cents. It's as if you had lived your whole life surviving only on what you could hunt with your bare hands and plant with rudimentary tools, regularly going hungry, and suddenly a modern supermarket appeared, filled with processed, packaged, preserved food ready for immediate consumption. William Windsor and Henry Newton, two visionary entrepreneurs who founded the company Windsor and Newton in 1832, immediately recognized the revolutionary potential of Rand's invention. They literally industrialized and democratized the small pigment workshops of Blombos. Gigantic steam-powered machines, operated by dozens of specialized workers, did in minutes what our ancestors did in weeks, grinding minerals into impalpable powder, mixing them with binders in the exact proportion, and hermetically packaging them for transport and preservation. The result of this industrial revolution was seismic for the art world. Art literally exploded and was democratized across the planet. The French Impressionists could finally leave their stuffy studios and paint outdoors, creating the plein air movement that would revolutionize the perception of light and color. Van Gogh could generously squeeze tubes of chrome yellow directly onto the canvas, creating his thick and vibrant textures without fear of wasting precious material. Picasso experimented freely with ultramarine blue, creating entire periods dedicated to a single color. Faber-Castell, a German company founded in 1761 by Caspar Faber and now one of the world's largest manufacturers of art materials, anchors its entire global reputation on the same fundamental Paleolithic premise: the absolute purity of the pigment and the chemical stability of the mixture. Their modern laboratories, equipped with state-of-the-art spectrometers and controlled climate chambers, perform rigorous permanence tests that simulate thousands of years of exposure, trying to artificially reproduce the natural durability that cave artists achieved through empirical knowledge passed down for generations. How many tubes of paint have you used in your life? Answer with a number, and think. Each one represents thousands of years of technical evolution. There is something profoundly mysterious and almost supernatural that directly connects the anonymous artist of Lascaux, who mixed pigments by the light of a fire 17,000 years ago, to the contemporary graphic designer working on a MacBook Pro lit by high-definition LEDs. Both feel the exact same inexplicable and irresistible urgency to transform an abstract thought into a concrete visual image. Neuroscientists at Newcastle University, led by Dr. Rebecca Chamberlain, conducted fascinating experiments using functional magnetic resonance imaging to observe human brains during the act of painting. The discovery was revolutionary. Painting intensely activates the same brain regions involved in verbal language, specifically Broca's area, responsible for speech production, and Wernicke's area, responsible for linguistic comprehension. This means that visual art and verbal communication are not separate skills that evolved independently. They evolved as complementary and interconnected systems. When our ancestors began to paint on cave walls, they were literally developing a second language, a form of communication that transcended the temporal and geographical limitations of spoken words. A painting can communicate across millennia. A spoken word dies in the air in seconds. This explains why, even living in a completely digital age, we instinctively continue to value the handmade, the original, the artisanal. Our brains still carry the ancestral genetic memory of when each pigment cost days of dangerous work to produce, when each stroke on the wall represented precious knowledge that could save lives or guide future generations. The global art materials industry today moves more than $45 billion annually, from basic watercolors for children to specialized pigments for the restoration of Renaissance artworks, because it is selling something much deeper and more primitive than simple colored paint. It is commercializing our ancestral and irrepressible need to leave permanent marks on the world, to communicate through time, to transform inert matter into lasting meaning. Think about this. Why do you still draw or paint, even when you have cameras that capture everything perfectly? Answer below. When you observe the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, surrounded by crowds taking selfies with ultra-modern cell phones, you are not just seeing the technical genius of Leonardo da Vinci or merely the result of years of Renaissance study. You are seeing the culminating result of 65,000 uninterrupted years of human experimentation with pigments. Each brushstroke of that enigmatic smile literally carries the DNA of the small experimental workshops of Blombos. The great modern paint brands, Winsor & Newton, Faber-Castell, Liquitex, Golden, are the direct and legitimate heirs of the first Paleolithic laboratories. They did not invent art. They did not create the human need to express oneself visually. They merely democratized and mass-produced access to the same fundamental materials that our ancestors fought desperately to obtain. The next time you carelessly squeeze a tube of acrylic paint, whether for a school project or to relax by painting on a weekend, remember that you are holding in your hands and channeling through your fingers the exact same primordial creative impulse that led a primitive human to dip their fingers in red ochre and leave their eternal mark on the damp wall of a dark cave. A final provocative question: will our digital trails, posts, photos, stories, have the same permanent and communicative power as the ochre on the walls of a Paleolithic cave? If this 65,000-year journey through the history of color made you rethink what it really means to be creative, leave a sincere like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more discoveries about the secret origins of the modern world. And tell me in the comments, what color would you choose to represent all of humanity? Because the story of our species is not just in history books, it's in the colors we still choose to use to paint our world.